Chapter 24, Prairie Lotus. Hannah somehow managed to get through the rest of the afternoon without encountering Papa. Bess fairly flew around the place. She moved the prairie roses from the wash tub to the lard cans, emptied out the tub, and cleaned it. Did more of the hemming work. Hannah was supposed to be edging one of the dress's sleeves with piping, but she was so distracted that she kept having to undo the stitches. She hardly even noticed Beth's departure at day's end. She put out some supper for Papa, then called to him that she was going to have her bath and go to bed. He was still organizing the shop for the opening and worked late into the evening. Her night was filled with terrors. It was the worst of her dreams. A giant Swenson grabbed her shoulder with his gigantuan paw and dragged her toward him. She thought she could not get away no matter how much she fought, but she tried so hard that as she woke herself up, flailing, gasping, sweating. The next morning, she did not get up as usual. She told Papa she wasn't feeling well, and he went to church without her. She forced herself to rise and dress before his return. Perhaps if she fixed a good dinner, he would not notice anything amiss. She felt sore all over, moving woodenly about as she made fried potatoes and fried onions to go with the salt pork. The meal was ready by the time she heard the front door open and shut. "Hannah!" She stiffened at the sound of his voice, loud, angry. A moment later, he strode into the kitchen. "What the blazes happened?" "What do you mean, Papa?" She was desperate to deflect his question. She was terrified that if she told him the truth, he would try to even things with Swenson, and who knew what kind of trouble that could lead to. "You tell me!" He pounded the tabletop. "All I know is more than a half dozen folks spoke to me after church, said they wouldn't be able to come to the opening. The very same woman who told me that they could hardly wait to have a dress goods shop in town. Something had to have happened to change their minds." "What did you hear?" That question seemed puzzling enough to calm him down. "Nothing exactly, but I had the feeling folks were talking about something they didn't want me to know," he scowled. "The ones who did speak to me were plenty clear. They're not coming to the opening, and from the way that they were talking, they've no plans to become customers either. Not a one of them would tell me why, and for every one of them who spoke to me, I'm betting there's others who would think the same." Word must have gotten around town about Hannah's encounter with Swenson. It didn't matter what had actually happened. The townspeople, most of them anyway, would assume that she was to blame, just as Mrs. Blake had. Indecent, sinful, unchristian. That was how they were thinking of her. And they would not patronize the shop where such a girl worked. She pressed her hands hard against her stomach. Not only had she been assaulted, but that same attack was being twisted to hurt Papa and the shop. The weight of the wrongness was crushing her, and she didn't know whether to cry or scream curses or run back to the Prairie and be sick. "Breathe, breathe." "You heard anything? Any talk about us or the shop?" Papa asked. "I've been home since yesterday afternoon," she said, careful not to lie. "I haven't seen anyone except Bess." Papa was shaking his head. "I guess there's nothing for it," he said. "We'll just have to open his plant and see what happens." His shoulders were hunched in what looked like defeat. Hannah was alarmed to see him like that again. I'd almost rather he'd be angry again. She groped for a thread of hope. What if she and Papa waited things out? Maybe the gossip and rumor would ebb and eventually fade from everyone's memory. But if people made up their minds that she wasn't respectable, they might force her to carry the taint for as long as she lived in LaForge. She and Papa would have to leave town to escape it. Hannah ate only 2 bites of her dinner. When Papa went upstairs for a Sunday afternoon nap, she put on her bonnet and went out the back door. The beginning of a plan had come to her. Miss Walters lived on 2nd Street, east of Main. Hannah did not have to walk up Main Street. She could get to the Walkers' place through the alleys. She reached the house, knocked on the front door, hoping that it would be Miss Walters who answered, and not her mother or brother with whom she lived. "Hannah?" Thankfully, Miss Walters had come to the door herself. Distraught, Hannah cut short her greetings. "Hello, miss. I need to ask you something. Would you like to come in?" No, thank you, miss." Miss Walters stepped outside. She led Hannah around to the back of the house, where there was a bench against the lean-to wall, and they sat down side by side. "Papa heard that people aren't going to be coming to our shop opening, and maybe not going to buy goods there at all." "I'm sorry, Hannah." She did not ask why, which meant that she had heard all the whispers. Hannah felt ashamed, even as she battled against the feeling. "Miss, I wanted to ask you if you thought it would be any good for me to go around town and call on people, on the women, to try and change their minds and get them to come to the shop." The thought of doing such a thing made her feel sick, almost sick with misery. "I could tell them what really happened. It wasn't my fault. I swear it wasn't, miss." I believe you, Hannah, Miss Walters said quietly. She paused and then added, It's not the first time that Mr. Swenson has been involved in an unpleasant altercation. Hannah inhaled sharply. If that's so, miss, the ladies might listen to what I have to say. She stopped, seeing misgiving in Miss Walters' eyes. For a few long moments, neither of them spoke. If I were you, Miss Walters said slowly, I think I would let things alone for a while. Kindly, she put a hand on Hannah's arm. This may be one of those times when Lise said, soonest mended. Hannah's head bowed and she shrank into herself. Miss Walters was acquainted with almost every family in town and would surely know better than Hannah how they might react to her calling on them. Yes, miss. I know it must be difficult, but I'm certain things will turn out for the best. Thank you, miss. Hannah said her goodbyes. On the walk home, she wondered what it would be like to feel certain that things would turn out for the best. Hannah broke the Sabbath by working on the green dress. She would complete it regardless of what happened. Odd, normally the prospect of a new dress would have been exciting. This one would forever be a reminder of failure. Even so, working was better than sitting still. Being busy helped to push the memory of the assault into a darkened corner of her mind. On Monday morning, the day before the opening, Hannah answered the door to Bess's knock, but Bess did not step inside. I'm sorry, she said. I'm not coming to work today. She looked at Hannah, her eyes full of regret. It's not me, I swear, it's Ma. She says I can't work for you anymore. She didn't even want to let me come here to tell you, but Pa said I could. Hannah stood very still, first in shock and then with anger. The Harrises had obviously heard about what happened. Mrs. Harris's reaction was very predictable. Mr. Harris had allowed Bess to come to the shop to deliver her message, but not to continue working. He, like Miss Walters, was sympathetic, but only to a point. They were in favor of fairness and justice as long as it wasn't too inconvenient or uncomfortable. Mama, why aren't you here? I can do the sewing, but I can't fix anything else. It's too hard to do it alone. She sensed Mama's silent answer. Alone? Hannah waited, her head down, staring at her shoes. What was that? Mama, please say something. Hannah, please say something. Startled, she looked up. Bess was still standing before her. You're right, Mama. I'm not alone. Mama had known the importance of helping other people and of accepting help from them. The missionaries, Miss Lorna, Papa, their customers, her friends. Maybe this is part of what it meant to be independent, learning when to be strong and when to be strong with the help of others. Bess, can I talk to you for a moment? Chapter 25. Bess came into the kitchen, but politely refused to sit down. Hannah stood facing her. It's pretty clear that folks have heard about what happened Saturday, but they haven't heard the truth. They think that I misbehaved badly, so badly that they're not going to come to the opening or buy from our shop. It's just not right that my family's whole livelihood is about to be ruined because of lies. I'm sorry, Bess whispered. How sorry? Bess blinked. You say you're sorry that this is happening. Are you sorry enough to help? But what could I do? A faint hope rippled through Hannah. I need the women in town to know the truth, that those men attacked me and I was not misbehaving in any way. But I don't want the law involved, because then my father would have to be told. She stared into Bess's eyes. If I try to convince the ladies, they won't believe me. No, it's worse than that. They won't even let me in the door to speak to them. But you could do it. They'd invite you right in. They'd listen to you. I'm not good at talking to strangers, Bess said. I didn't say it would be easy. Silence. I want to help, really I do, Bess said, her eyes filling with tears. I just don't think I can. What would I say to Ma? The rippling of hope was dissipating. It's a hard thing what I'm asking her to do, but somehow I have to get her to see that it's not nearly as hard as being ignored and attacked and hated and losing your business in your home. For if the shop proved unsuccessful, Papa would have to sell up and they would have to move on once again. She wondered what she would remember about their time in LaForge, the good things she hoped, those weeks at school when it had been just her and Bess and Sadie studying with Miss Walters. Miss Walters, her own voice surprised her. She could go with you. Bess raised her head. Do you think she would? I don't know. I went to see her yesterday and she told me not to do anything. Lise said soonest mended. But it took her a while to say that. Anyway, you could start by talking to her. Bess seemed to stand up a little taller. That much I can do. All morning Hannah had hoped that Bess would return during the noon hour to tell her how things had gone. Dinner came and went with no visit from Bess, and then the afternoon seemed to lengthen without end. Hannah spent most of the day working on the dress. The only good thing about Bess's absence was that Hannah had more than enough to keep her busy, and while she wasn't proud of it, she couldn't help the petty, spiteful thought that Bess had left her to do all the buttonholes to herself. When at last she finished the hundreds of tiny knotted buttonhole stitches, she sewed on each of the 12 glass buttons good and firm. Then she stood and stretched. She reached up with one hand and rubbed her cramped neck muscles, and then remembered the bruises and lowered her hand. After she put the flat iron on the stove to heat, she worked on covering the lard cans. The blue cans were lettered with the words "Pure Lard" in white, and their tin edges were rusty and paint chipped. She picked out some pretty but inexpensive fabric, cut it into 6 carefully measured rectangles. Once she had sewed a quick rough seam on them, she could open up the fabric to form a cylinder about 6 inches tall, and she slipped the cylinder over each can and tied a length of cream-colored ribbon. The plants had done their part to perfection, blooming right on schedule. Hannah had rearranged the window display, and she moved the wrap of fabric off center to the left and put the 6 rose bushes in their cans here and there on the sill. Papa had screwed a metal hook onto the ceiling of the window well on the right-hand side, and that was where she would hang the finished dress. The lawn ironed up beautifully, the fabric smooth and soft. Hannah hung the dress on the hanger and the hanger on the hook. She stepped back to look at the entire display. She would turn everything to face outward in the morning. The blue sky above, the lovely fabrics on the rack, the prairie roses in full bloom, and especially the green dress. Hannah was so proud of how the window looked that she wanted to clap her hands like a child. Mama would have loved it. But in the next moment, tears were wetting her eyes. What if no one came to the opening? What if she and Papa were the only people in town who ever saw the display? At least a dozen times, Hannah paced the building between the windows in the front of the store. She waited for her friend until the sun had disappeared below the edge of the prairie. Bess did not come. If she had good news, she'd be here by now. "Good night, Papa," she said. Papa was still in the shop, sweeping, dusting, and polishing by the light of a lantern. He had already cleaned the whole place, but was doing it again. She sensed that he, too, needed to keep moving. He looked up and nodded. "Good night, Hannah." Hannah got into bed, turned on her side. She thought she might cry, but her eyes remained dry. She lay awake for a long time. Eventually, she heard Papa go to bed. In the darkest part of the night, she thought of something she had forgotten to do. She rose, lit the lantern, tiptoed downstairs. She found what she needed in the workroom, and then fetched the dress. Hannah unbuttoned the dress's collar, and on the underside of the collar, near the right shoulder seam, she embroidered the 5-petaled lotus, that's a flower, in pale pink thread. "There, Mama, now it's finished." She hung the dress and crept back upstairs. "Hannah, what's the matter with you? Are you poorly again?" Yanked from sleep by Papa's calling voice from downstairs, Hannah sat up so quickly for the moment the room reeled around her. "I'm fine, Papa," she called. "What?" "Then hurry yourself and get down here." Mystified, Hannah dressed hastily. She rushed into Papa's room, looked at the clock. It was a few minutes before 9. She could never remember sleeping this late before. Then she heard an unfamiliar sound from outside. The window in Papa's room was at the front of the building above the shop. She looked and choked back with a cry of astonishment. On the sidewalk was a long line of people, a line that crossed the alley and went halfway up the next block. Mostly women and girls, a few men. They were chatting cheerily, and those standing by the window were gazing at the display, pointing, nodding, and smiling, which meant that Papa must have taken down the brown paper and turned everything in the window well to face the street. "Hey, Edmonds," one of the men called out. "It's 9 by my watch. You opening today or not?" "That's right. It's 9 o'clock," someone else said. As Hannah watched, Papa opened the door and went outside. "Yes, we're open," he said. "Come in, everyone, and welcome." Hannah drew back from the window, dizzy with disbelief. Bess had done it. Somehow she had gotten what looked like half the town to come to the opening. And tomorrow we will finish this book.